Survival International, which works to confront atrocities against tribal and indigenous peoples worldwide. So Survival is just one of many organizations involved in today's event, including Frontline Defenders, Hindus for Human Rights, India Civil Watch International, and the Humanism Project. The event today is co-sponsored by Adivasi Lives Matter, the Dalit Solidarity Forum, the Federation of Indian American Christian Organizations of North America, and the Indian American Muslim Council. And it's wonderful to have all these organizations come together, and huge thanks to everybody who's involved. I'm here just to introduce our moderator, Meena Kandaswamy, and then she will go on to introduce our speakers. Meena has written passionately about the violent crushing of dissent by the state in India, which led to the death in custody of Father Stan. Through her poetry, her fiction, articles, and activism, Meena has shone an intense light on the brutality of casteism and violence against women, especially Dalit women. This work has brought her both critical acclaim and a vicious backlash from the Hindu fundamentalists, but she maintains an undaunted determination to expose the truth. We are really delighted that she's moderating today's event. So over to you, Meena. Thank you.
Thank you, Joe, for introducing me, and I thank all the attendees for taking the time and for showing up today. I think it's very important that, at a time like this, we really show up and be counted. So I just want to make a small introductory remarks and then leave the floor to all of our distinguished and very courageous speakers. I just want to start by saying that when Father Stan Swamy was arrested in the Bhima Koregaon case in October 2020, he was already marked out to become a dead man. His death by cardiac arrest that happened on 5 July 2021 was only the official formalization of what state terror had sought to achieve from the first day. His death was not an accident. Father Stan Swamy's death was not natural. It was an extrajudicial killing and a custodial murder committed under the solemn and blind eyes of the state machinery. Suffering, death, the denial of bail, these are not aberrations. These are the design, construct, and DNA of an anti-terror law like the UAPA, which is being used today in India to silence human rights defenders, journalists, writers. Father Stan Swamy was first arrested on 8 October 2020. During these many months, he was never once taken for questioning. Clearly, the National Investigating Agency did not have a shred of evidence against him. His arrest was mainly made to prove a warning to everybody fighting for human rights and the rights of indigenous tribal people, the Adivasis of India. Further, it's important to note that it has been 3 years since the first arrests were made, but the trial has not even started. Nobody knows when this trial will commence. The aim of this punitive legal process is to make the process itself the punishment. No one can deny that the aim of his incarceration was to kill him. No one can deny that the brutal prison conditions which he was made to face were part of a daily death sentence. I remember one of my close friends, a journalist in Mumbai, who said to me that Father Stan Swamy struggled to even sign his name in the court. He was 84 years old and suffering from an advanced stage of Parkinson's disease. Let us not forget that the Bhima Koregaon case explicitly was built around the rumor that a bunch of academics, activists, intellectuals, lawyers, human rights defenders were plotting to assassinate the Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi. The case was a jar of lies. The case was nonsense upon stilts. Unfortunately, everybody seems to know this except the most respected judiciary and the highly compliant media. Here, I want to say that, what has happened to Father Stan Swamy is reflected again and again, especially in this present climate where you see arrests of human rights defenders like Tista Setalvad, you see the arrest of journalists like Mohammed Zubair, who was calling out hate speech. So the Bhima Koregaon case has become emblematic of the many harms that we face in India today. The use of anti-terror legislation like the UAPA to target human rights defenders, the use of digital surveillance and evidence planting to attack civil society, and the consequences of jailing rights defenders of the very marginalized communities. Because if you look at the people who are arrested under the Bhima Koregaon 16, these include some of India's foremost Dalit intellectuals like Dr. Anand Teltunde. It includes people who are fighting corporate land grab and mining operations like Sudha Bharadwaj. It includes the poet and writer Varavara Rao. And so I just want to take one more moment before I finish my talk to talk about the forensics of the case, to say that over the last 3 years, independent organizations which have gone into the digital forensics of the case have absolutely destroyed the fact that, there is any case at all. So if we looked very carefully, for instance, 2 years ago, Arsenal came out with a report saying that the documents which were found on the computers of one of the accused, the human rights defender, Rona Wilson, were actually planted through malware, and that never once when the laptop was in his custody did he open these said files. And recently, there was another report by Arsenal which also showed that similarly, Surendra Gadling's computer had been targeted through malware. Now we have a report from Wired, which is less than a month ago, which is published in the Wire, and where the findings of Sentinel-1 expose very clearly that 3 email accounts of Varavara Rao and Rona Wilson and Professor Hani Babu, 3 of the accused among the Bhima Koregaon, were hacked. And in fact, the recovery email which was given to these hacked accounts belonged to the Pune City Police, and this including the full name of a particular police officer. And this Pune police are the ones who are actually leading the Bhima Koregaon probe. So it really shows the evidence of complete complicity between these hackers and the police force which has started this probe. So when there is no evidence, I think it becomes imperative for us, and also a way of seeking justice for Father Stan, to ask for the release of the 16 prisoners and for, to drop this case. And having said this, I want to go back to talk about, and I think I want to thank the Adivasi speakers for joining us today, because what is going on in Adivasi areas really sheds a light on why prisoners are, people are political prisoners. It sheds a light on what India is facing, especially the extreme militarization and corporatization, and how Adivasi resistance is actually putting a little bit of a break, but they are meeting some of the most brutal forms of state terror. And I want to conclude by saying that what is very tragic is that Father Stan Swamy had to pay with his life for the political prisoners to be heard. And let's never forget that this simple priest was born in Tiruchi in Tamil Nadu, made Jharkhand his home, and spent his life dedicated to the cause of Adivasi people. This honorable, humble person, he even had to move to the court to be granted a straw, a sipper, so that he could have his meals. What happened to Father Stan Swamy will shake our conscience. Although it's the government which must take the blame, all of us carry the heavy cross of having allowed things to get to such a tipping point. And having said this, our united struggle, not only as Indians, but struggles from everywhere around the world, will be the greatest respect that we can pay to Father Stan Swamy. And I wish to close my introduction by thanking the leaders from around the Western world for intervening at this crucial juncture on this issue. As the situation within India deteriorates rapidly, the international community will be called upon again and again to prevent the worst from happening in my country. Thank you so much, everybody. And now I want to introduce a representative, Juan Vargas. Juan Vargas has represented California's 51st district since 2013. He's the third of 10 children of Tomas and Selena Vargas, who immigrated to the United States from Mexico in the late 1940s as part of the Bracero program. Representative Vargas graduated magna cum laude with a BA from the University of San Diego and earned an MA in Humanities from Fordham University. After leaving the Jesuits, he served in an orphanage in El Salvador's civil war-torn jungles. After leaving the Jesuits, he attended law school, graduating in 1991. In Congress, he serves on the committees of Financial Services and Foreign Affairs and is a part of over 20 caucuses. He joins us today to announce a powerful intervention, a congressional resolution honoring Father Stan, making it clear to the Indian government and governments around the world that the mistreatment and incarceration of individuals advocating for human rights cannot persist. So we are going to hear.
Hi, I'm Congressman Juan Vargas, and I represent California's 51st Congressional District. Today, we come together to commemorate Jesuit Father Stan Swamy, a staunch human rights defender who dedicated his life to giving a voice to the voiceless. On the one-year anniversary of his death, we remember what he was fighting so hard for, and we honor his lasting memory. Father Stan passionately advocated for the rights of the indigenous Adivase people, trained young community leaders, and strived for equality and justice for many mistreated communities in India. As a former Jesuit myself, I'm appalled by the abuse Father Stan faced while in custody. To be denied even the dignity of medical treatment was far less than he or anyone deserved. The Jesuit teachings I know well remind us to love and accept others, to always raise your voice, but never raise a fist. Father Stan will be remembered for his lifelong dedication to carrying out these teachings and his steadfast commitment to the greater good. I trust everyone here today will continue to carry on his legacy. I recently introduced a resolution in Congress to commemorate Father Stan and to encourage an independent investigation into his death while in custody. No one who fights for human rights should face such violence and neglect. While in prison, Father Stan penned a letter detailing the plight of his fellow prisoners and the inspiration their spirit of solidarity had brought him. His letter, last words, which still ring true today, read, "A caged bird can still sing." Let's all bow our heads for a moment of silence in honor of Father Stan. Thank you, and may Father Stan's soul rest in peace.
That was a very powerful contribution from Juan Vargas. I now call upon the Scottish Parliament. I'm just going to introduce the Scottish parliamentarian, Scottish MP Neil Hanvey. He's a Scottish politician serving as a leader of the Alba Party in the House of Commons since 2021 and the Member of Parliament for Kirkcaldy and Cobdenbith since 2019. Neil was previously the SNP Westminster Group spokesperson for vaccine deployment and the SNP representative on the Health and Social Care Select Committee. During his career in nursing, he completed a post-registration diploma in oncology and palliative care. Under successive promotions, he took up the post of charge nurse on the Teenager Cancer Trust Unit before taking up the role of senior nurse for oncology and head and neck surgery. In 2005, Neil was appointed as Divisional Nurse Director for Rare Cancer at the Royal Martin Hospital. On his return to Scotland, he entered the world of politics in 2012 and lives with his husband and 2 children in Fife. MP Hanvey tabled an early day motion in the UK Parliament that condemned the arrest, harsh interrogation, refusal of bail, and ongoing detention of Father Stan Swamy, and a second early day motion that condoled Father Stan's passing and understood that the failure of the Indian courts to grant bail or provide timely access to medical care may have contributed to Father Stan Swamy's death. I call you, sir, to please speak now. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Mina, and thanks to everyone who's tuned in for this very special meeting. I'm Neil Hanvey. I'm the Member of Parliament for Kirkcaldy and Cowdenbeath. Sorry, Mina, about the Scottish words, but it's my great privilege to serve my constituents in Westminster. Now, I didn't know Father Swamy. I'm not a Catholic. I'm not a Jesuit. In fact, I don't observe any organised faith or religion personally. But in November 2020, a constituent of mine contacted me highlighting the plight of Father Swamy and the allegation that he had personal links with banned extremist groups, of Maoists and Naxalites. In that email, Father Swamy's words in a video statement 2 days prior to his arrest were included, and I think it's really poignant to mention those words, which are the last recorded words of his before his incarceration. What is happening to me is not unique. Many activists, lawyers, writers, journalists, student leaders, poets, intellectuals, and others who stand for the rights of Adivasis, Dalits, and the marginalized and express their dissent to the ruling power of the country are being targeted and put in jail. And this all happened during the early days of the pandemic. And one of the things that MPs have to be very careful about is the locus of responsibility that they have for any case that they take up. I reached out to colleagues in my then party who I knew were of Catholic faith. I didn't want to step on anyone's toes. I wanted to make sure that it was dealt with as sensitively as possible. But unfortunately, I was disappointed in my attempts to secure that support. So I did a bit of research through the House of Commons library. I highlighted the petition that was being promoted on social media regarding Father Swamy's case. I tabled, as Mina said, an early day motion highlighting Father Swamy's plight. Took that to the local and national media. I liaised with the Jesuit missions in Scotland for guidance and to make sure that any comments that I made were not inflammatory and would not contribute to the distress of Father Swamy and his supporters. I also liaised with the Bishops' Conference of Scotland. I led a cross-party letter to the Foreign Secretary where I set out my deep concerns that by defending and promoting human rights, an elderly and infirm priest now found himself held on counter-terrorism charges by the government of a supposedly democratic and free nation. I highlighted the Foreign Secretary's own statement in the Commons on the 6th of July 2020 on the global human rights sanctions and regulations, where he clarified that the UK government were committed to protecting human rights and freedom of religious belief. Unfortunately, not long after this, Father Swamy passed away in custody. I, as Mina said, again, laid down an EDM marking his passing and paid tribute to his life. I also spoke in the chamber on the 6th of July as soon as I learned of his passing, and the speaker allowed me to mark his passing in that way. And this leaves me with the question, why did this case matter to me? Was it really just a case of responding to a constituent? Was it about faith? And I'll talk about that in a second. Or was it really about humanity and rights? And one of the things that I can't get away from is that I despise injustice, however small or great that injustice may be. I always seek to speak up where I see injustice. Sometimes when we do that, it's at personal cost, and that can be no clearer than in the case of Father Swamy. Well, I've reflected and questioned myself about all of this, and I think one of the things that resonates in my mind and my thinking about this situation was I was born in the north of Ireland, which was divided along religious boundaries for many years. My grandfather was a unionist, and I was born just before the Irish Troubles started. But we moved to Scotland when I was a young lad. So I had a grounding, and my grandmother was a Sunday school teacher in Presbyterian faith. And when I moved to Scotland, my two best friends were Catholics. And so I went to chapel with them throughout my later childhood years and into my adolescence. And it was throughout that I questioned, had a personal journey questioning faith and religion. So I borrow my personal values from the religious teachings and moral teachings, such as the parable of the Good Samaritan. And when I studied a master's degree, I paid attention to ethics and philosophy, and a lot of those teachings underpin my view of humanity. I wouldn't call myself an atheist or an agnostic or an agnotheist. I've tried to live my life in line with responsibility, compassion, freedom of judgment, and to speak up against injustice. And there can be no greater need than to have the freedom to practice one's faith as a fundamental right. And despite my own personal, ill-defined personal faith, I would defend the right of others to worship as they see fit. So that must obviously happen without impinging upon the rights of others and other faiths. So I hope that's a helpful contribution to today's meeting. It's really just my story of my contact with Father Stan Swamy and his plight, and a reflection of my sadness that we did not see justice prevail and that he was not set free to be with those who loved and cared for him in his final moments. So thank you very much for the invitation to speak.
Oh, sorry, I was muted. Oh, I'm so sorry. I was just spending a lot of time thanking you and trying not to get emotional. I think that what is very linked to even Father Stan Swamy's incarceration, also his Jesuit identity, is the way he's been targeted because he's worked for the Adivasi people, who definitely, there are attempts by, Hindutva forces to bring them under the rubric of Hindu religion. And whenever they have tried to resist this and to assert their own identity and spiritual identity, cultural identity as Adivasis, they have met with resistance. So somebody like Father Stan Swamy, who's worked in their midst, has stood for, their right to be what they choose to be. And your words definitely do resonate here. And I just also want to use this chance to talk about where we come from and our inability. Hanvey talked about how he could not get his colleagues or, enough pressure on this issue. And I also felt the same sense of absolute betrayal. When Father Stan Swamy passed away, his body came to Tamil Nadu, which was his home state. And it was given honors by everyone, ranging from the chief minister to literally every Tamil parliamentarian. And I really broke down because on the one hand, it was good to see him being honored. But on the other hand, he was a Tamil only in his death. Like, we are 70 million people, and we've never considered Father Stan Swamy Tamil enough for ourselves to take to the streets to demand his release, because all of us knew from day one that he was innocent. So how do we fail him? Ourselves is a big issue. I now want to welcome, I don't want to spend more time on my own comments. I want to welcome Mary Lawlor. She needs no introduction, because whenever another human rights violation takes place in our country, we are looking forward to what she's saying. So recently there was her statement on Tista Setalvat. So, she's somebody we all look up to in the hope that, she speaks for us. She has served as the UN Special Rapporteur on Human Rights Defenders since May 1, 2020. She has worked extensively with and on the situation of human rights defenders. In 2001, she founded Frontline Defenders, the International Foundation for the Protection of Human Rights Defenders. As executive director from 2001 to 2016, she represented this organization and had a key role in its development. She was previously the director of the Irish section of Amnesty International from 1988 to 2000. And she became a board member in 1975, was elected chair. And she's currently an adjunct professor of business and human rights in the Center for Social Innovation, School of Business, Trinity College, Dublin. She's a member of the advisory board of the School of Business. And as I said to you, all of this is just profound to everybody knows, ma'am. And we all look forward to hearing from you. And we're so happy and delighted that you are in person. Madam, please take the floor.
Thank you very, very much for having me here today. It is really important for me to commemorate the life and work of Father Stan Swamy, whose exemplary commitment to the rights of India's most marginalized communities cost him his life. If Father Stan's life represents the best tradition of human rights defense and social justice work, his unlawful arrest and death in custody represent the rapidly accelerating assault on rights, justice, rule of law, and democracy by India's current political regime. Father Stan's life was a gift for the communities he worked with and for movements for human rights, democracy, and social change everywhere. The institutions he built, taught, and trained generations of social justice activists. For the last several decades of his life, he lived and worked with the Adivasi communities, helping to create awareness about the laws that protected their land, resources, and self-governance, and documenting violations of those laws. This work inevitably brought him into conflict with the state that routinely undermines this legislation in order to make the forests and mineral-rich lands available to corporate developers, and threatens and arrests Adivasis resisting such dispossession. When Adivasi youth were arrested in large numbers for peaceful protests against land acquisition starting in 2014-15, Father Stan formed the Persecuted Prisoners Solidarity Committee, published a report, and filed a case against the state of Jharkhand on behalf of at least 3,000 Adivasi youth in jail. In 2017, his support for the Patal Gadi movement, in which large stone slabs inscribed with sections from the Indian Constitution granting special autonomy to Adivasi areas, was erected outside villages, saw him arrested for a tweet when the movement was declared seditious by the BJP government of Jharkhand. He was released only when a new government came to power in the state. In October 2020, Father Stan Swamy was arrested as part of the now infamous Bhima Koregaon case. Starting in June 2018, 16 prominent individuals and human rights defenders, including Father Stan, were arrested and accused of several offences, primary among them being acting on behalf of or being members of the outlawed Communist Party of India, and remain imprisoned. This landmark case highlights several aspects of the current regime's attack on human rights and the rule of law. 1, the targeting and attacks on human rights defenders. The BK16 have long histories of writing and working for the democratic rights of India's poorest and most oppressed, Dalits, Adivasis, and women. All of them have been outspoken critics of the ideology and politics of Hindu Vata, an uppercase and patriarchal Hindu supremacist ultra-nationalism. Protesters against the Anti-Muslim Citizenship Amendment Act have been similarly targeted, with 18 of them jailed under the same draconian anti-terror law as the BK16. Kashmiri human rights defenders, journalists, and youth have been a special target for the regime. Journalists and others documenting the systematic persecution of Muslims or the government's failures during the COVID pandemic have also been arrested. The most recent arrests of Tista Setalvad, Orbi Shrikumar, and Mohammed Zubair shows just how urgent it is to intervene to prevent the further deterioration of the rule of law in India. 2, several of the arrests, including that of the BK16, have been carried out under the Unlawful Activities Prevention Act, India's foremost anti-terror legislation. The systematic use of the act, along with the sedition laws, to quash dissent has been widely condemned, including by sitting and retired Supreme Court judges. An amendment in 2019 allows the government to designate any individual as a terrorist, without even the need to establish membership or association with banned groups. The Act permits detention without charge for up to 180 days and restricts recourse to bail. India has some of the most overcrowded prisons in the world. The numbers of Muslims, Dalits, and Adivasis are vastly disproportionate to their numbers in the general population. The tortuous pace of the legal process means that the majority of those in jail are under trials whose cases are yet to be heard. It is well known that the process itself is the punishment. The COVID-19 pandemic was allowed to spread rapidly throughout the prisons, and the requests of many of the BK16 to be allowed out on bail during the course of the pandemic, given their age and pre-existing conditions, were consistently denied. Father Swamy, who, as we all know, suffered from Parkinson's, had to wait for several weeks before the NIA let him have a sippy cup. And drinking straw. I mean, that's just so cruel. His pleas for medical bail were denied several times, and eventually, of course, he passed away in custody. Another defendant was denied reading glasses. Several were denied and are denied simple requests to books. Their letters are read, their phone calls to family severely restricted. The chief body of evidence used to indict the arrestees in the BK16 case, a set of letters purportedly written by some of them and naming several others, showing funding and support to banned Maoist groups, was reportedly remotely planted using digital malware. The planting of evidence was established through a series of reports by a reputed American digital forensics firm. Further investigation by another data security firm has traced the author of this hacking and digital planting to the prosecuting police themselves. In addition, like a vast swathe of other human rights defenders, the BK arrestees, along with their lawyers and family members, were the object of surveillance by Pegasus spyware implanted remotely on their phones. The government and its prosecuting agencies have remained silent, refusing either to take responsibility for this egregious violation of its citizens' rights and citizens' privacy, or to investigate it. And is continuing to hold the BK detainees even after the case against them has been shown to be heavily compromised. So based on the above, I reiterate my call to the Indian authorities to, and I keep meeting, not keep meeting, but I have met the Indian ambassador in Geneva. Immediately and unconditionally release all those human rights defenders detained without basis as reprisal for their human rights work, especially those under trial in the BK case, upholding the judicial principle that bail should be the norm and not the exception. Ensure that the treatment of the above defenders while in detention adheres to the conditions set out in the body of principles for the protection of all persons under any form of detention or imprisonment adopted by the UN General Assembly Resolutions 43-173, 9th of December 1988. And this is very important. Repeal or amend legislation documented as having been widely misused to silence human rights defenders, such as the UAPAs, and immediately stop using such legislation to persecute and jail human rights defenders and quash peaceful dissent. And finally, thoroughly investigate the use of malware like Netwire and Pegasus to surveil human rights defenders and hold those responsible accountable. Today, as I said, I'm very happy is the wrong word, but very gratified to have been asked to help commemorate Father Stan's life. He was truly a marvelous man. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am, for speaking on Father Stan's extensive work among the Adivasis, because what we see now with Bhima Koregaon is like a microcosm of what is happening and what Father Stan was trying to bring to the surface about under trials, about prisoners, about the widespread misuse of the UAPA, about the way in which Adivasis were simply being labeled as Maoist and then thrown into prison to enable corporate land grab, to enable resource extraction, all of which was happening. So I really thank you for taking the time, but also thank you for making these larger comments about the need to repeal the UAPA, the need for international engagement, and as you've also pointed out, on the deteriorating situation in India, because with Tista's arrest, then I saw these tweets, people were saying sabka number aayega. So as a society, as activists, all of us are afraid of when is our turn going to come. So thank you so much for speaking up and being so bold about it. I want to now, without any further comments, just go to our first Adivasi speaker, Gladson Dungdong. He's here and he earlier was talking about his connection. He's a human rights activist, researcher, writer, and public speaker based in Ranchi, India. He's the founder of the Adivasi publications, Adivasi Sankar and Jharkhand Human Rights Movement. He comes from the Kharia Adivasi community in Jharkhand. His family was displaced for an irrigation project built at Chinda River in Sindega district of Jharkhand in 1980. His parents were brutally killed in June 1990 when they were going to attend the civil court in a land-related dispute of a family in the village. He's an author of more than 24 books, including Adivasis in Their Forest and Whose Country Is It Anyway? Untold Stories from India's Indigenous Peoples. He's here to speak about Father Stan's legacy and the issues dear to him, because he has worked alongside Father Stan. So here, Gladson, we're waiting for you. Please speak to us. Thank you.
Hello, Meena, thank you so much, and Johar to all of you. First of all, I would thank Survival International and Joe for giving me such a wonderful opportunity to speak about Stan legacy. Actually, I have experience. I worked with him, especially with work together during the Operation Green Hunt. I think you have heard this Operation Green Hunt was launched against the so-called saying that Indian state is wants to cleanse the Maoist, because all the Adivasi areas were declared as the Maoist area those days. And those days we realized that in the name of so-called Maoists, thousand Adivasis were put in jail, and many innocents were brutally killed. So we together with Father Stan Swamy, we used to go to the forest areas inside the deep forest, and then doing the fact funding on the brutal killings. So those days actually we did fact finding together, and also did intervention. At the same time, we also did a kind of advocacy. And I would recall the very important event when we went to meet advisor of the governor, who was looking after the home ministry. So we had taken about a case about the brutal killing of innocent Adivasi women. Then this advisor of the governor, who was previously Director General of Police of Jharkhand, he clearly told that you both are open ground Maoists. So he said Stan is a senior Maoist, and he told me as a junior overground Maoist. So this is the way actually state was taking Father Stan Swamy and people like me who was working with him. So Father, because of Father was a big voice during Operation Green Hunt, and later he became a great face of human rights in Jharkhand. And secondly, obviously, that UN Rapporteur, she already told that how he was dealing with the cases of under trials. And those days, news were coming repeatedly that 6,000 people were put in prison under the tag of Naxalism, Maoism. So Father had done research, and he also extracted information from the government offices through the use of RTI, and he had filed PIL in the Jharkhand High Court, and that PIL is still going on. And then third area which he worked was the displacement. Actually, his work, he started against displacement. He studied in West Simbhum, and then he was again doing research, doing writing, raising issues of anti-displacement, and also participating all the anti-displacement movement. And then another thing he did about the land bank. I think you must have heard that in 2014, when Chief Minister, first non-Adivasi Chief Minister took over Jharkhand, he actually started a kind of window for the corporate to grab Adivasi land. So he launched the land bank, and then 2.1 million acres of land were enlisted under land bank. And this land belonged to the community under the PISA Act, like religious land, community land, forest land, etc., which are supposed to be under the Gram Sabha village councils. But without asking even village councils, these lands were enlisted for the corporate. So Father Stan had done research, and he was intervening in land bank issues also. And he was constantly raising the question on the issue of fifth schedule and Adivasi central laws. He was saying why fifth schedule is not enforced, and why Adivasi laws are not enforced. Basically, fifth schedule is a kind of territorial rights given under the constitution to the Adivasis, but it was never enforced. That's why Adivasi lands were grabbed legally, illegally, and still it is going on. He was also, filed a case of sedition because he wrote actually articles, etc., on the issue of Pathalgadi. Actually, as far as Pathalgadi movement is concerned, he had never been to this Pathalgadi movement physically, but he was supporting this movement. And then because of his Facebook posts and articles, a sedition charge was imposed, levels against him, and then police was running behind him. Many times they had gone to arrest him. And then he participated in almost every movement. He was the one person who would believe that anybody who is fighting for the cause of Adivasis, either the person comes from right, center, or left, doesn't matter, but he was with everybody. So most of the times, because of he had lots of friends from the left-oriented organizations. So he was level that he's part of the Maoist movement, he's open ground Maoist, and he's supporting and so and so, because he also formed an organization to fight for the rights of under trials. And then he had established special institutions in Ranchi with the clear intention that many Adivasis who are fighting for their rights, when they come to the capitals, they have no place to stay. So the clear purpose is that activists will stay there, and also training will be imparted. So he established an institution. At the same time, he had trained many Adivasi activists. These days, you can find that there are many Adivasis who were trained by the Father Stan Swamy are fighting for the cause of Adivasi rights. So I would say, because there is no time, I was told I should speak only just for 5 minutes. So I think what is very important in this case is that Father Swamy was punished by the Indian states merely for practicing his fundamental right to freedom of speech, which is primarily protected by the Indian state, but the same state whose constitutional duty to protect the fundamental right punished Father Stan Swamy. And of course, today that there is no space for dissent in India. The present government is targeting, and a couple of speakers already has spoken about that. So I would definitely say that there was no case against Father Stan Swamy for his whole life. So what he was doing primarily, he was doing research, doing fact finding, intervening, and participating in the people's movements. So we can say that he was using his fundamental right to freedom of speech. So today, if you raise voice, demand for the enforcement of the constitutional rights, demand for the enforcement of the people's oriented or people centered Adivasi centered laws, and also you speak for your rights, all this comes under the purview of crime in India. So in this situation, I think I'm speaking today. I don't know what will happen tomorrow, because I was already offloaded when I was going to London in 2016, and also many cases are already going. Father Stan Swamy also part of the CNT SPT movement. These two acts, which are actually safeguarding laws for us, made by during the British regime. And then these laws were targeted. The BJP government wanted to withdraw these two laws, amend these two laws, so that our land, territories, and resources will be handed over to the corporates. And we protested. Two cases are still going on against me and so many colleagues. So I would say Father Stan Swamy was definitely a law-abiding citizens. He was just demanding for the enforcement of the constitution, enforcement of the Adivasi laws, and protection of the rights of the Adivasi. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Gladson, for highlighting the work that Father Stan Swamy was doing on the ground in Jharkhand, how fearless he was, and how he was, even at the threat of having the state take action against him, he was standing up and exercising his freedom of speech. And also so thank you, Gladson. There are two things I just wanted to, before we transition to the next speaker, I just wanted to say two things about your contribution to today's commemoration event. The first is that the fear that you speak about, that Gladson speaks about being implicated in a case, about being called a Maoist. These are fears that Adivasi, very, very, very real for all of human rights defenders in India, but especially for Adivasi people, especially for Adivasi activists. I was recently in Silgair in Chhattisgarh, and the way in which I met Adivasi people who have 36 cases against them, 14 cases against them. And these are women who don't even know what the cases are about. They go to access some public service and they are told, well, you have so many cases against you. So the way in which the weaponization of law in order to simply criminalize the Adivasi populations of India, in order to enable land grab, in order to enable militarization, it is absolutely shocking. And thank you so much for coming here and speaking about this fear. And I do hope that, things change for the better, that, this climate of fear, at least because of, all of this resistance, lifts up at some point. And the second thing is that I also wanted to highlight, you spoke about displacement, you spoke about the fifth schedule, you spoke about Operation Green Hunt and all of the oppression that's going on Adivasi people, but it has not stopped. What we now have instead of Operation Green Hunt is Operation Samadhan Prahar. And what the state is trying to do is to, Chhattisgarh government, for instance, is very proud of having established 36 military camps in the last 3 years. And now there are methods, speaking about establishing integrated development centers, that is an army camp itself will function as a school, as an Anganwadi, as a hospital, and all of this militarization so that people cannot escape this grid. That if you have to be a citizen who wants to access any public service, you have to go through the military and to absolutely control Adivasi lives. And I think the rest of India has to, one, learn from Adivasi people for peaceful resistance, but also speak out, just like Father Stan Swamy did, and highlight the issues that that they're facing there. So thank you once again, Gladson. I'm now going to speak. The next speaker happens to be a video message from the member of European Parliament, Alvina Alametsa. She's a Finnish politician of the Green League, who has been serving member of the European Parliament since 2020. Before entering European politics, she has been a city council of Helsinki and chairs its Equality Committee. She also works as a project leader in the mental health organization Mental Health Partnership Finland. She serves in the Committee of Foreign Affairs. It's very important to note here that she authored a report on EU-India relations in April 2021, and she joined 20 other members of the European Parliament in writing to Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi and warned that activists have been jailed for their peaceful work, targeted under anti-terror laws, labeled as terrorists, and are facing increasing restrictions. And she noted the systematic use of anti-terror legislation UAPA to quash dissent. So now we move on to her video message.
Dear human rights defenders, you have gathered today to fight for one of the most important causes, the human rights and dignity and freedom for all of us and all the people in India. You also have gathered to honor Father Stan and his memory that goes on. I think this topic is very urgent. We have many proof that India is now more close to genocide than any other countries. There is a major risk for Muslims in the countries, for minorities, for females, and I think this is something that must be tackled. But at the same time, many of the EU member states and many politicians only want to do a lot of business cooperation with India and do not put the rights of the people in before the business opportunities and all kind of cooperation. I think we have to change the thinking and definitely emphasize that we cannot have business deals, investment, corporations. We cannot further our relationship if the issues in India are not fixed. And I think this must be fixed with a good, more open human rights dialogue with more concrete solutions and commitments from the side of India. I think you are all doing an amazing and brave work to raise these topics. We all know what's happening to journalists in India, to activists in India, and I very much hope I can visit all of you in India soon and see how the reality is like and raise these voices. And for example, I would love to visit the prisons and I would love to visit all those people who are in the most distressed situations. And if the Indian government really has nothing to hide, they will hopefully let me do that. Thank you all so much, and I wish you all the best in your hard work, and let's keep working together. We must not give up for the memory of these people we have lost and for the good of these people who are now fighting and are in a severe risk.
Thank you, ma'am, for that message. And now we have another video message coming up shortly, but I just wanted to again thank the Finnish member of European Parliament. It's very important the way she speaks about international communities and other nations only interested in India as a market, and therefore turning a blind eye to the human rights violations that are taking place there. Unfortunately, I also think, you know, the geopolitical situation and how China and Russia behave also emboldens the Indian government, knowing that the West really needs India on their side. So, you know, and somehow Indian people are caught in this crossfire. And I think we are now going to thank you, Madam, once again for talking about coming and visiting Indian prisons. It's a very urgent task. Now we are going to have a video message from Australian Senator David Shoebridge. He's an Australian politician and former barrister. He's a member of the Australian Greens and was elected to the Senate as party's lead candidate in New South Wales at the 2022 federal election. He previously served in the New South Wales Legislative Council from 2010 to 2022 and on the Woollahra Municipal Council from 2004 to 2012. Senator Shoebridge has been a staunch voice against the spread of communal hatred in India and the impact this hatred is having on Australia's communities as the violence and rhetoric in India affects Australian Indians. So we are going to have a short video message.
Ready? I'm David Shoebridge, a Green Senator in the Australian Parliament, and today I join with thousands of people across the globe to commemorate the life and work of tribal rights activist Stan Swamy. A year ago today, 84-year-old Stan Swamy died after being jailed for 9 months on politically motivated anti-terror charges. He was denied bail despite his age and suffering from serious health conditions, including Parkinson's disease. Father Swamy's crime was to work to be a powerful and effective advocate for marginalised communities in India, particularly the rights of Adivasis. For this work, he has received global recognition, including the 2022 Martin Ennals Award. Tragically, he did not receive recognition or respect from the Indian BJP government. He was harassed, jailed and subjected to shocking treatment in prison. All of this led to his death in jail. Even when he was being ill-treated in prison, Father Stan continued fighting against arbitrary detentions of Adivasi youth. The United Nations Working Group on Arbitrary Detention has described Swamy's death as a stain on India's human rights record, and they are right. Father Stan's arrest and mistreatment reflects the depth of the problems with India's justice system, caused by the Unlawful Activities Prevention Act, a so-called anti-terror law that allows for arbitrary arrests, followed by detention, sometimes for years without trial. The increase in the persecution of minorities in India is very disturbing to us in Australia. The continued erosion of human rights and the rule of law in India makes India a less reliable partner, economically and politically, for democratic countries like Australia. This is ultimately a tragedy for both countries. So today I join with elected representatives, activists and human rights campaigners around the world and call on the Indian government to constitute an independent investigation into the death of Father Stan and to follow the principle of bail not jail in releasing political prisoners, to repeal the Unlawful Activities Prevention Act and the colonial era sedition law, and to publicly condemn the persecution of India's minorities, repeal anti-conversion laws that are exacerbating the persecution of minorities, and to hold perpetrators of violence and lynchings accountable. These are the minimal actions needed to begin restoring India's place as a wonderfully diverse multicultural democracy. These are calls made by India's friends around the world who know that human rights, economic rights and social justice all march together. So rest in peace, Father Stan, because your legacy and your work outlives you.
Now we move on to our next speaker, who is another Adivasi activist, Lalsu Nogoti, is law and activist from the Maria Adivasi community of Gadchiroli in Maharashtra state. Lalsu has for many years been a vital voice for Adivasi land rights, and he's spoken out powerfully against the so-called development projects that are imposed violently on India's indigenous communities. In 2017, he was selected for the Indigenous Fellowship Program by the United Nations Office of the High Commissioner of Human Rights. Lalsu was raised by his community, embedded in the rich culture with its tight connection to the forest, on which their economic and spiritual lives depend. I had the privilege of hearing him, and I think what the points that he makes in terms of culture are very, very vital. And so please, we're going to hear him in just a second.
लालसू सोमा नोगोटी है। मैं भारत के महाराष्ट्र जो राज्य है वहाँ पे गढ़चिरौली जिला है। गढ़चिरौली जिला में भामरागढ़ एक तहसील है, उस तहसील से मैं बिलोंग्स करता हूँ। और इस देश में बहुत सारे आदिवासी जनजाति निवास करते हैं। उनके अपने अपने पारंपरिक, सामाजिक, सांस्कृतिक, आध्यात्मिक प्रथा परंपराएं हैं। वो उस तरह से अपने जीवन जीते आए रहे। वो निसर्ग को पूजते हैं, वो पहाड़ी को पूजते हैं, वो नदी को पूजते हैं, वो निसर्ग पूजक है। तो ऐसे समय में उनकी खुद की अपनी एक धार्मिक भावनाएं हैं, धार्मिक आस्था है, उनकी अस्तित्व और अस्मिता जो जीने की परंपरा है वो अलग है। लेकिन ऐसे समय में इस देश में जो आदिवासी जन समुदाय है इस देश में निवास करते हैं, उनको अपने अपने धर्म में ओढ़ने की, अपने अपने धर्म में शामिल करने की जो बहुत सालों से यहाँ पे देखने को मिल रहा है। तो बहुत सारे लोगों को धार्मिक आक्रमण, मैं तो ये सोचता हूँ कि ये जो धार्मिक आक्रमण आदिवासियों पर हो रहा है वो बहुत ही खतरनाक तरीके से इस देश के आदिवासियों पर हो रहा है। एक तो यहाँ के जो आदिवासी है उनको मतलब इस देश के सभी आदिवासियों को हिंदू लिखा गया है, जबकि इस देश के आदिवासी या फिर आदिवासी हिंदू नहीं है, वो उनको हिंदू ही लिखता है। जब मैं स्कूल में जाता हूँ तो उनको न पूछते, उनके जो पेरेंट्स है उनको न पूछते हुए उनका धर्म हिंदू लिखा जाता है। वो उनको हिंदू ही लिखा जाता है। जब बच्चा स्कूल में जाता है तो वो हिंदू ही लिखा जाता है। तो इस तरह से उन पर धार्मिक जो भावना है वो थोपा जा रहा है यहाँ के आदिवासियों पर। और एक तो ये है, हिंदू तो लिखा जा रहा है कि यहाँ के आदिवासियों का अपना जीने का एक तरीका है। ऐसे समय में आदिवासी जो खाता है, मैं हमेशा सोचता हूँ, आदिवासी जो खाता है, जो पीता है, जो सोचता है, जो पूछता है, उसको आदिवासियों को बाहर के जो हिंदू लोग हैं या फिर बाहर के जो लोग हैं, वो उसको जो बहुत पिछड़ा जनजाति है, जो ये लोग कभी नहीं सुधरेंगे, इस तरह से उनको कहा जा रहा है। इस तरह से आदिवासी अगर पत्थर को पूछता है, आदिवासी अगर पेड़ को पूछता है, आदिवासी अगर नदी को पूछता है, आदिवासी अगर बारिश को पूछता है, क्योंकि ये निसर्ग पूजक है, तो ये लोग उनको कुछ भी देवी देवता नहीं है, ये किसी को पत्थर को भी पूछते हैं, पहाड़ी को भी पूछते हैं, नदी को भी पूछते हैं। इस तरह से कहकर उनको ये अविकसित है, इस तरह से उनको कहा जा रहा है। मतलब इनका जो भावनिक या फिर इनको जो धार्मिक भावनाओं को अनडेवलप तरीके से इनको लोग सोच रहे। तो जबकि इस तरह से नहीं होना चाहिए इस देश में, कि उनकी अपनी अपनी विचारधारा है, अपनी अपनी सोच है, अपने अपने तरीके से वो जीते आ रहे हैं यहाँ पे। इस देश में एक तो ये भी देखा जा रहा है कि बहुत सारे जगहों पर खदान किया जा रहा है, माइनिंग्स हो रहे हैं, जबकि जंगलों पर आदिवासी रहते हैं, जंगलों पर उनके देवी देवता हैं, जंगलों के देवी देवताओं को वो पूजते हैं। मतलब सुरजागढ़ जो ठाकुर देव है, सुरजागढ़ पहाड़ी में ठाकुर देव, ये जो यहाँ के जो माड़िया जनजाति का आद्य दैवत है, वहां पे हजारों सालों से वहां पूजा करते आ रहे हैं, वहां पे जतरा कर रहे हैं हजारों सालों से। वहां पे लोग बड़ी मात्रा में अलग अलग राज्यों से लेकर महाराष्ट्र के बहुत सारे लोग वहां पे आ रहे हैं और वहां पे पूजा कर रहे हैं, जतरा कर रहे हैं। लेकिन इस तरह के खदानों के माध्यम से, खदानों के मतलब डेवलपमेंट के नाम से जो खदान किए जा रहे हैं, विकास के नाम पर जो खदान किए जा रहे हैं, इससे आदिवासियों के देवी देवताएं नष्ट हो रहे हैं। आदिवासियों का जो जिस पर उनका आस्था था, जिस पर वो जिसको वो भगवान मानते थे, वो सब नष्ट किए जा रहे हैं। बहुत सारी जगहों पर बैलाडीला से लेकर रावघाट से लेकर सुरजागढ़ तक बहुत सारे जगहों पर खदान किए जा रहे हैं। ये विकास के नाम पर किए जा रहे हैं। ये विकास नहीं, ये विनाश है। तो इस तरह से मतलब एक तो ये हम लोग देख रहे हैं कि जब हिंदू धर्म को लेकर कोई अगर बयान देता है तो बहुत सारे बवाल मच जाते हैं इस देश में। मतलब उस पर बहुत दिन चर्चा होती रहती है। लेकिन आदिवासियों के जो धर्म है, आदिवासियों के जो सोच है, आदिवासियों के जो अस्तित्व और अस्मिता जिन पर उनका निर्भर है पूरा, उनको खत्म किए जा रहे हैं और उस पर कोई नहीं लिख रहा है, उस पर कोई नहीं बात कर रहे। ये इस देश की बहुत बड़ी शोकांतिका है, ऐसा मुझे लगता है। नमस्कार, धन्यवाद।
Thank you, sir, for that message. Even if you're not present with us, he's actually there. He's live as well. So thank you so Ajit. Thank you so much आपके contributions के लिए. The next speaker is Soni. She is an Adivasi school teacher turned political leader in Sameli village of Dantewada in South Bastar, Chhattisgarh. She was arrested by the Delhi police crime branch in 2011 on charges of acting as a conduit for Maoists. During her imprisonment, she was tortured and sexually assaulted by the Chhattisgarh State Police. Some of the officers who actually led this harassment were later given awards by the Indian state. By April 2013, the Indian courts had acquitted her in 6 of the 8 cases filed against her due to lack of evidence. After release from prison, Sori began campaigning for the rights of those caught up in the conflict between Maoist insurgents and the government, in particular criticizing the violence against the indigenous people in the region. She's also a recipient of the Frontline Defenders Award 2018. Now we are going to hear a short message.
भारत देश में आम आदिवासी के जीवन बहुत खतरे में है। आदिवासी जल जंगल जमीन के मालिक हैं। वो हमेशा आदिवासी अपने जल जंगल जमीनों के लिए ही लड़ाई की है, उनको बचाने की लड़ाई की। अगर आदिवासी जंगलों के लिए लड़ते हैं तो वो सिर्फ अपने लिए नहीं लड़ते हैं, पूरे भारत देश और पूरे हिंदुस्तान के मानव जाति के लिए लड़ते हैं, उनके लिए बचाने की बात करते हैं। अगर आज पेड़ नहीं रहे, पहाड़ों नहीं रहे, पानी की स्रोत नहीं रही, जिंदगी कैसी होगी? इसकी आवाज आदिवासी हमेशा उठाती है। उसके बदले में भारत सरकार क्या देती है? उसके बदले में भारत सरकार मौत देती है। ये जो तस्वीर है, ये अगर कोई लड़ता है तो उसको ऐसे चेहरे जलाया जाता है, अपने अधिकार की बातें करो तो उसको चेहरे जलाए जाते हैं, और कोई नहीं, उनको मार भी दिया जाता है, मौत भी दिया जाता है। और ज्यादा कुछ करो तो वो एक यहाँ पुलिस प्रशासन की बातें, कानून में रहने वाले रखवाले, वो उतना ध्यान किया जाता है। तो आदिवासी के लिए भारत सरकार ने आज तक क्या किया? भारत सरकार से सवाल पूरे हिंदुस्तान को पूछना चाहिए कि कैसे आदिवासियों को खत्म करने के लिए कितनी बड़ी बड़ी साजिश भारत सरकार ने की। कभी नक्सल के नाम पे आदिवासियों को मार के जेलों में भेजना, उनको मार पीट खून खराबी हर तरह से कर, धर्म के नाम से। यही नहीं, अब तो सीधा रॉकेट लॉन्चर फेंका जा रहा है, उन पे बारूद फेंका जा रहा है, उनको ड्रोन हमले किया जा रहा है। ये मैं कोई बनावटी बातें नहीं कह रही, पूरे हिंदुस्तान से मेरी अपील है, अगर ये चीजें अगर झूठी साबित हुई तो आप लोग जो चाहे वो कर ले। आप आइए बस्तर में आके देखिए, आदिवासी का जिंदगी इतने खतरे में, बस्तर इतने खतरे में है, इसको कैसे बचाएं, कैसे करें? जुल्म पर जुल्म, जेलों में ठूस दिया जा रहा है, उनको एनकाउंटर किया जा रहा है, और पहाड़ों को पूरी खोद के बड़े बड़े कंपनी का लगाने की बातें करते हैं। और आपको एक उदाहरण देते हैं मैं कि कैसे बस्तर में खूबसूरत पहाड़ों को कुचल के और कैसे उनके मानव जाति का हनन किया जा रहा है। ये जो मैं देख रही हूँ, यहाँ मेरे आदिवासी ये लाल पानी को पीने के लिए मजबूर हो जाते हैं। ये पानी को शहरों में शुद्धिकरण किया जाता है, लेकिन पहाड़ों से इतना शुद्ध पानी, बहता पानी को ऐसे आयरन, ऐसे पानी पीने के लिए वो किया जाता है। क्यों? क्योंकि उस पहाड़ों में बड़ी बड़ी कंपनी लगा के आयरन, लोहा, खनिज संपदा, ये सारी चीजों को लूटा जा रहा है, पूरी पहाड़ों को कुचला जा रहा है। इस पहाड़ों से तो जब खुदाई होती है, उसके बाद इस तरह के लाल पानी निकलती है। और ये पानी मैं आज उस युद्ध भूमि में हूँ जहाँ बस्तर में खून खराबी से लथपथ मेरे आदिवासियों को मारते जा रहे हैं, बलात्कार करते जा रहे हैं, जेलों में डालते जा रहे हैं, मेरे भाइयों को पूरी करंट शॉट लेते के चलते जा रहे हैं। लेकिन आज सवाल पूरे भारत देश से मेरा एक ही सवाल है, और भारत देश से यही कहना चाहती हूँ उन पूरे भारत देशवासियों से कि मेरे इन बच्चों को कैसे बचाएंगे? क्योंकि ये चीजें जो दिख रही है आप सबके सामने, इस तरह के यहाँ की पुलिस फोर्स ने कैसे हमारे बच्चों के ऊपर ऐसे लांचर फेंक के उसको पूरी तरह समाप्त करने की कोशिश किया जा रहा है, ये बहुत बड़ा सवाल है। और मेरे आपसे सभी बुद्धिजीवी और सभी पूरी सामाजिक कार्यकर्ता पूरे देश से मेरा एक सवाल है, और आप लोग से अंतिम अपील करती हूँ, मेरे इन बच्चों को, मेरे आदिवासी के बस्तर के उन बच्चों को बचाया जाए। ये लांचर अगर जिस दिन फूट जाएगा तो ये बच्चे बचने के लिए भी काबिल नहीं रहेंगे, और पूरा मेरा बस्तर शमशान हो जाएगा, बारूदों से, आगों से पूरी समाप्त हो जाएगी। आज तो गनीमत है कि ये लांचर नहीं फूटी है, और ये लांचर फूट गया, और ये तो क्या होगा? अगर इन लांचर के पर ये सवाल उठ रहे हैं, पुलिस ये कहती है कि नक्सलवाद का, नक्सलवाद कहती है हमारा नहीं है, तो ये है किसका? इसका सवाल कौन पूछेगा? पूछने के लिए आज पूरी देखिए जनता पूरी कड़ी हुई है और कह रही है दीदी हमको बचा लो। तो मैं दीदी क्या कर पाएगी, सोनी क्या कर पाएगी, लेकिन पूरे देश से मेरा सवाल है और अपील है, मेरे बस्तर वासियों को बचाया जाए, मेरे आदिवासी को बचाया जाए, ताकि इन बच्चों को देखो, ये बच्चे ने खुद बता रहे हैं कि ये फूटते हुए हमने सुना है, गिरते हुए हम लोग ने देखा है, पूरी महिलाओं ने देखा है। तो मेरे बुद्धिजीवी और सामाजिक कार्यकर्ता, मेरे सारे संगठनों से मेरी अपील है कि बस्तर को बचाने के लिए आगे बढ़िए, और मेरे मानवता का जो आनंद हो रहा है, मेरे बच्चों के ऊपर इतनी खतरा मर रहा है, इस तरह की चीजें फेंक के मारने की कोशिश किया जा रहा है, मेरे बच्चों को सुरक्षित बचाया जाए। बस मैं ये कहती हूँ कि मेरे पूरे देशवासियों से मेरी अपील है।
We watched this very emotional video from Sori, and it really reminds us that this is how we continue the legacy of Father Stan Swamy, speaking for India's Adivasi people, realizing that the war on India's indigenous people has been escalated to the next level. As Sori showed us in this video, it's no longer just about, people caught in the crossfire of a conflict. They're using drones, they're using rocket launches, they are using the question is, how do we save India's children? And as I said earlier, when I visited Silgher in Bastar, I saw with my own eyes that these are villages which don't have electricity, which don't have schools, which don't have a hospital nearby. There is no running water, there are no toilets. But in this village, they want army camps. They want like eight lane roads to allow for the transportation of resources which they want to extract from mining illegally on lands which belong to the people, lands, Adivasi people. So this is the kind of thing that Father Stan Swamy would have fought for if he was here today. And the kind of issues that Soni speaks about, cases of people being, burnt with acid, the kind of shocks and the torture that takes place once Adivasi people are imprisoned. All of this continues unabated. And I want to also extend Soni's appeal to all of you, saying that if we are in India, we owe Adivasi people the visiting there, writing about what is there, amplifying the struggles that are taking place on the ground instead of the silence in this media. And then we now move to the conclusion. So, I think it was a very powerful note to end on this. I want to thank all of you for being here. I want to thank each of you. And this is when we speak about Father Stan Swamy, it's very important to understand that, Bhima Koregaon case was a travesty, and the evidentiary basis has been completely destroyed. There's absolutely no excuse left for the Indian state to keep holding the Bhima Koregaon 15 as prisoners. We have to also demand justice for Father Stan Swamy, because this label of a terrorist, this label of somebody who was, attempting to assassinate the Prime Minister, whatever they were saying about him is false. So he has to be exonerated. Father Stan Swamy, earlier these Scottish MPs spoke about what does faith mean to you. I'm not a Christian, but I know enough of the Bible and enough of, whenever I think of Father Stan Swamy, I think of Jesus as somebody who suffered for us, as somebody who paid with his life, and this is literally what's happened in front of our eyes. It's we may be 2000 years away, but this is somebody who lived a life of austerity, sincerity, poverty, all of what Jesuits stand for. And, he faced the harshest oppression. He paid with his life. So this is not a small thing. This is extremely emotive. So I also believe that, when we think of Father Stan Swamy, we take up this message and we fight for all political prisoners in India. And I thank everybody from other countries, the international forum, because international pressure, we still believe, is the last resort that can change things. And I thank all of the leaders who've spoken today and for the actions they have taken. Here I want to talk about the congressional resolution introduced by Representative Juan Vargas. I want to remind my viewers here of the letter by the MEPs, and also the debate that took place in the UK Parliament on persecution of Christians and religious minorities, in which Father Stan's case was mentioned. So speaking about all of this, I thank all of the international leaders for speaking up, and I wish that there are many more debates and hearings and resolutions and concrete action to ensure that Indian democracy survives this current crisis, to ensure that people like Soni, Gladsang and Lalsu are not also labeled, terrorist or Maoist, that, they continue to work democratically, that they continue to have the freedom to speak what they want to speak, and that, Adivasi people have the right to their own land and right to decide what they do with their land and their futures. So on this note, I also want to thank all the organizers. I think Joe Woodman would say the thanks for the organizers. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Meena. That was wonderful moderating, and everything you said has been so powerful. Thank you. And thank you to all of our speakers today. It's been an honor to be here with you all. As Meena said, there's been various organizations involved, and a lot of work has gone into making this event possible. So the main organizers were Frontline Defenders, Hindus for Human Rights, India Civil Watch International, and the Humanism Project. But we were really honored to be joined in this, and Survival, did I say Survival International in there? I think I didn't. And we are honored to have been joined in this by Adivasi Lives Matter, the Dalit Solidarity Forum, the Federation of Indian American Christian Organizations of North America, and also the Indian American Muslim Council. Lots of work went in, so we're just very grateful to everybody. Back to you, Meena. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Joe, and thank you to everybody. We're going to end this meeting on this note. Once again, thanks to all our participants and everybody who made the time to come across time zones and participate. Long may the memory of Father Stan Swamy live.